The content of this episode is for entertainment purposes only. Historical events discussed are based on documented records, scholarly research, and primary sources. This episode contains discussions of the desecration of human remains, institutional corruption, and the political violence within the medieval church. The Velvet Guillotine does not endorse any political, religious, or ideological interpretation of the events portrayed. The criticism offered here is directed at the documented conduct of specific historical figures and the institutional structures of a particular era, not at any faith, religious community, or the belief of its adherents. Listener discretion is advised. Most places accumulate their history quietly, politely even. The stones soak it up, the walls hold their tongues. The events that happen inside of a building settle into the architecture over the centuries, becoming part of what the place is without ever becoming part of what the place tells you. You walk in, you look up, you admire the vaulted ceiling and the marble floor and the centuries of accumulated grandeur. And you do not, for one moment, see the specific thing that happened here in January of 897. Because nothing in the building's lovely composed presentation requires you to do so. Sacred spaces are the very best at this particular trick. Churches, cathedrals, basilicas, buildings that have been in continuous use for devotional prayer for centuries. They develop a kind of institutional serenity that is exceptionally good at absorbing the distinctly less serene episodes of their past. The incense, the candlelight, the sheer accumulated weight of 1,000 years of prayer. It all conspires to produce an atmosphere in which it becomes genuinely difficult to picture anything grotesque ever having occurred on the premises. And the building would simply prefer that you don't. And then, my darlings, you find out what happened inside the Archbasilica of San Giovanni in Laterano in the winter of 897. And the atmosphere, I am so sorry to report, stops doing its job entirely. A pope had a corpse dug up. He dressed it in full papal vestments. He had it propped on a throne in the single most sacred room in Western Christianity, and he put it on trial. And when the corpse lost, which it did because a corpse is not, on the whole, very well positioned to mount a vigorous legal defense, he had it thrown into the river. This happened in this building, the one that you're standing in with the beautiful ceiling. Welcome to Dastardly Places. I'm April Rain, and today I'm taking you to the oldest cathedral in the Western world, and we are going to talk about what it means that the most sacred institutional room in all of Christendom was the chosen venue for one of the most spectacularly unhinged legal proceedings in recorded history. So bring comfortable shoes, because there's a whole lot of marble. The Archbasilica of San Giovanni in Laterano, also known as St. John Lateran, sits on the southeast edge of Rome, atop the Caelian Hill, in a neighborhood that is today residential and by Roman standards rather quiet. It is not the Vatican. Many tourists stream towards St. Peter's, which is larger and more famous and sits clear across the city inside Vatican City itself. San Giovanni in Laterano gets the smaller crowd, which is one of history's nice little ironies, because San Giovanni in Laterano is older, and for most of Christian history, it mattered considerably more. So let me be precise about its rank, because this is the very part of the tour that the buses skip. This is the Cathedral of Rome, not the Vatican's ceremonial showpiece, the actual episcopal seat of the Bishop of Rome, which is, in case you have forgotten, the formal job title of the Pope. It is an archbasilica. It is the only church on earth that holds that particular title, and it outranks St. Peter's itself. And carved into the facade, between the main doors, is the building's opinion of its own importance, in Latin, for all to read. mother and head of all the churches of the city and the world. That is not, you will notice, a modest claim. It is not a humble little plaque. It is, in the precise theological and institutional language of the Roman Church, a flat declaration that this specific building is the center of the Christian universe. And it has the carving to prove it. And this building has been making that very same claim for a very long time. The Emperor Constantine donated the land and the original building to the Bishop of Rome in 313, in the flush of his conversion. The Lateran Palace next door served as the cheap papal residence for nearly 1,000 years, far longer than the Vatican ever has. So when medieval people pictured the papal seat of power, darlings, they were picturing this, not the Vatican. Now, the building you would walk into today is not the building of 897. San Giovanni in Laterano has been knocked down and raised back up more times than is strictly dignified. By earthquakes, by fires, and by the general medieval enthusiasm for setting Rome on fire. The structure you see now is largely the work of a 17th century renovationist by the name of Francesco Borromini, with associated latter tinkering. The ancient bones are still there, underneath and within. And what greets the visitor is essentially the Baroque reimagining of a much older thing. But what has not changed, not once, not for an instance, is that claim. The sentence over the door has been asserted continuously in this place for 1,700 years. The walls have been rebuilt, but the boast has not. And it is precisely that boast, the absolute, foundational, utterly non-negotiable authority of the Bishop of Rome, made flesh in this one building, that turns what happened here in January of 897 from a grim anecdote into something far more telling. Because the cadaver synod was not staged in some drafty ecclesiastical broom closet on the wrong side of town. It was staged here, in the most authoritative room Western Christianity possessed, which tells you a great deal about the men who convened it, and exactly what they understood authority to mean. In January of 897, Pope Stephen VI convened a synod, that's a formal church council, at the Lateran. In itself, this was the most ordinary thing in the world. Synods were how the church did business, disputes settled, doctrine clarified, councils called. Popes convened them all the time, and the Lateran was exactly the right room in which to do it. What was not ordinary, darlings, was the defendant. Pope Formosus had died in April of 896, roughly 9 months before this synod sat. Stephen VI, who had come to the throne after 2 very brief intervening pontificates, gave the order: exhume Formosus from his tomb in St. Peter's, carry the body across the city to the Lateran, dress it in full papal vestments, and seat it upright on a throne to answer formal questions. The charges were very formal: perjury, violation of church canon, and the matter of his being Bishop of Porto before becoming Pope, a jurisdictional irregularity that mattered enormously in the canon law of the day. A deacon was appointed to speak for the corpse, because, and I do love this, you cannot legally hold a trial without a defense. So a man stood beside the body and supplied the procedural fig leaf that turned the public assassination of a dead man's reputation into a properly documented legal proceeding. I think about that deacon a lot. He had the worst brief ever handed to a defense counsel, and the client couldn't even pay him his thanks. But I digress. Stephen presided. He did not delegate the feeling. By the surviving accounts, written down decades later, but drawing on contemporary sources, he conducted himself with a ferocity that unsettled even an audience thoroughly accustomed to the ordinary savagery of 9th century papal politics. He screamed at the corpse. He demanded to know why Formosus had so coveted the papacy. And there is something almost knowing in it when you stand back. He seems to have grasped on some level that a trial with no living defendant had a terrible hole at its center, and that the only thing available to fill that hole was the sheer theatrical voltage of his own performance. The energy of the prosecution was doing the work that the silence of the accused could not. The corpse was found guilty, on every count naturally. Its vestments were stripped, the fingers of its right hand, which are the blessing fingers, and those are the ones that the Pope uses to ordain and to consecrate, those fingers were severed, and the body was dragged through the streets of Rome and thrown into the Tiber River. Now, the exact room in the Lateran where this took place is not marked today. You cannot buy a ticket to it. The basilica has been so thoroughly rebuilt since 897 that the precise architecture of the 9th century Synod Hall no longer survives in any identifiable form inside the present structure. And here is the thing that matters, and the thing I want you standing in. That building sits on the exact same ground. The institutional space, the Lateran as the seat of papal authority, the room where the Pope of Rome wielded the absolute power of his office, is continuous with the room in which Stephen VI stood and screamed in a 9-month-old corpse's face. That continuity right there is the entire point. The cadaver synod did not happen out of the edges of the church, in defiance of it. It happened at the dead center of the church, conducted by its head, using its own formal machinery. The institution did not prevent this. The institution was actually the mechanism that made all of this farce possible. The body of Formosus did not stay in the river. Supporters fished it back out. And that act of retrieval itself is a kind of verdict, darlings. A quiet referendum delivered by whoever in Rome had access to the riverbank, and a strong objection to the eventual result. He was reburied in secret, and later, when the political wind turned, as it forever did in that century, he was restored to St. Peter's with full papal honors. The people of Rome, or enough of them, simply declined to accept the outcome and went and got him back. The Tiber itself is one of Rome's most patient facts. It has been through the city longer than the city has been called Rome. It received Formosus in 897, and across the centuries that followed, it received a great many other inconvenient people whom Rome power had finished with. The river was always part of the city's infrastructure of consequence, the place where the consequences of official decisions were sent, once the official rooms were done with them. Rome has a cathedral for the beginning of things, you may say, and a river for the end of them. The stretch of the Tiber nearest the Lateran is not, I should warn you, a stop on any reputable walking tour. It is a working urban riverbank, hemmed in now by the great embankment walls thrown up in the late 19th century to stop the flooding. These walls have lifted the river out of the city's daily life in a way that the medieval Tiber never was. In 897, the water was right there, present, accessible, part of the texture of the streets in a way that the tiny, channeled version is not. But this is the same river, still running through the same city, still as it has always been, downstream from the Lateran. Stephen VI, for his part, did not enjoy his handiwork for long. Within a few months, a popular uprising, fed partly by genuine outrage at the synod and partly by the bottomless political instability of the age, pulled him down. He was imprisoned and strangled in his own cell before 897 was out, less than a year after convening the trial. His successor annulled the whole proceedings. Formosus's ordinations were declared valid, and the entire spectacle was officially unhappened. And the Lateran absorbed all of it: the synod, the annulment, Stephen's strangling, and the long stretch of papal mayhem that followed. the decades the chroniclers labeled as the pornocracy, the rule of harlots, a name that tells you a great deal less about the women who actually ran Rome politics in that period than it does about how horrified the men writing it down were that the power was finding itself in women's hands. All of it happened in and around and through this one building. The institution carried on, the walls stood, and the sentence over the door did not so much as flicker. Mother and head of all the churches of all the city and the world. You will notice the inscription contains no exception clause for January of 897. San Giovanni in Laterano today is a working basilica and a major site, and it draws far fewer visitors than St. Peter's, which frankly works in its favor. The crowds are manageable, and the space is navigatable. The quality of attention that the building rewards is actually available to anyone who troubles to bring it. And the interior is, I will say, without a trace of sarcasm, extraordinary. Borromini's 17th century renovation produced one of the great Baroque interiors of Rome. The nave lined with colossal figures of the apostles standing in their niches, the gilded ceiling overhead, the sheer scale of the thing pressing down on you. The Lateran baptistry, alongside it, is one of the oldest Christian buildings still standing and is largely original in its structure. The 13th century cloister is among the most beautiful in the world, and the building is genuinely a marvel. And I want to say that on the record before I say the next part. Because there is also a Lateran museum, the Museo Storico della Basilica, which holds artifacts from the building's long life, relics, papal portraits, fragments of the earlier structure. And it is, like every other institutional museum of its kind, a lovingly curated presentation of the institution's understanding of its own significance. The triumphs are there, beautifully lit. The less flattering episodes are present only in the sense that the historical record cannot be entirely scrubbed. And they are decidedly not the story that the museum has come to tell. The cadaver synod, you will be astonished to hear, is not a featured attraction. It is thoroughly documented in the histories of the papacy, in the scholarly literature, and anywhere a serious account of the period is kept. It is simply, shall we say, not on the gift shop postcards. There is no little brass plaque reading, "On this spot, a pope screamed at a corpse." And there is no audio tour guide stop number 11. And this is not a scandal in itself, darlings. It is simply what institutions do. No one leads with their worst afternoon. The Lateran has been standing for 1,700 years, and it has banked enough authentic grandeur that quietly declining to dwell on the corpse trial is a perfectly sustainable editorial policy. I do not blame them for it. I just notice it. And noticing is actually my whole job. Because the specific character of the cadaver synod, that it took place at the absolute dead center of institutional authority, that it ran on the church's own treasured procedures to produce a total collapse of everything those procedures were built to guarantee, is not some footnote in the building's history. It is, in every exact sense, the thing that this building makes possible. Absolute authority, housed in a single sacred place, exercised with no external check on it. This is what that looks like the day it goes wrong. And the building is still standing, still making precisely the same claim over the door, still receiving visitors who, and who could blame them, are mostly thinking about the ceiling. Now, I want to be honest about something, and I want to set the lightness aside to do it. The Archbasilica of San Giovanni in Laterano is, with no exaggeration, one of the most significant buildings in the history of Western civilization. That claim above the door is a real claim. Not because I personally endorse the theology behind it, but because the institution housed there has shaped the course of European and world history in ways that are almost impossible to overstate. To walk into this building is to walk into something that has mattered continuously for 1,700 years. And that is exactly why the Cadaver Synod matters. It is not a story about one mad pope doing one mad thing in a back room. It is a story about what happens at the very center of the most powerful institution in the Western world when that institution has been built so completely and so deliberately that no one standing inside it is able to say the necessary sentence. This is wrong, and I have the authority to stop it. Stephen VI was wrong. Nearly everyone in that room almost certainly knew that he was wrong. And the Cadaver Synod happened anyway, in this building, using these procedures. Because the institution had constructed itself around the principle of absolute papal authority, so thoroughly that the authority itself had become the only available check on its own abuse. And a check that only answers to itself is not a check at all. The building is still there. The claim is still there. The architecture of unchecked authority has better insulation now, better public relations, better canon law, better institutional memory of precisely what it costs when things go this far wrong. And the architecture is the same. This has been the Velvet Guillotine. I'm April Rain, and Dastardly Places drops weekly because history happened somewhere, and somewhere, darlings, is usually still standing, still charging admission, and still thinking about that ceiling. Stay dark.